Recording is going. We are good to start. Because it's not a regular meeting, so we don't.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Alexi Nolan, Executive Director at Boulder County Public Health. This is our Board of Health study session, budget study session. We are hoping this evening to get approval for our draft budget, our proposed budget for this year. It's been an interesting year with lots of intriguing twists and turns and challenging in many ways. So thanks everybody for joining us this evening, and I will turn it right over to Armando.
Good afternoon. My name is Armando Guardiola, Director of Administration and Finance. And before we start today's budget retreat, I do have a guest who will be speaking on the budgetary and grant reporting discovery. If you recall, right around September when I started, prior to that, there was a contract out that went out with CLA. They came in and kind of looked at our systems, particularly to budget and some of our grants. So it took a while. We had to go back to the drawing board and kind of rescope the whole project. And I'm pretty comfortable, or actually very happy on the results and the work that CLA did with us. And so I'm going to pass this along to Amy, who's been the project manager and kind of running this whole project. So Amy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Armando. Thank you for that nice introduction. It was certainly a pleasure to work with you and Desiree and Sean. I am going to pull up the presentation. Is everybody able to see my deck okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So my name is Amy Helene. I'm a digital data and analytics transformation consultant with Clifton Larson Allen, CLA for short. And as Armando indicated, in Q4 of last year, Boulder County Public Health employed CLA's Digital Services Division to do an assessment of opportunities with the budgetary and grant reporting process. And how we decided to conduct that discovery process, we really, Armando and Desiree and Sean, we wanted to make sure we got really robust insights into the process. And so digital transformation, there's kind of three big pillars when we start talking about digital transformation. There's a people component, a process component, and platform data and analytics component. And so the modality we decided to take to the project was to conduct a survey. We thought a survey would give us the most robust solution to really probing into opportunities, strengths, and weaknesses with a diverse audience at Boulder County Public Health. So we designed a survey and employed survey analytics to understand the current landscape. Data collection was from April the 15th of this year through May the 2nd of this year. And we received a response rate back of 25%. And if you need some context to how that percentage is, that's a really good response rate from surveys. With surveys that we see today, it can go as low as 10%. So we were really pleased to get 25% response rate. But the other piece of evaluating a response rate is to look to see who responded to that survey. And we had a great mix of leadership level positions, management, as well as individual contributors. As we combed through the data, our findings were very interesting. So when we talk about digital transformation and data and analytics, we often expect to see a platform. Platforms like Oracle and Dimensions float to the top as being the top area of concern. But what we find time and time again, people, process, and then platform is using usually the unfolding events in terms of where we need to focus. And what we found for Boulder County Public Health was no different. And something else I should have said at the start, as I start walking through this, if you have any questions, I'd love for this to be interactive. Feel free to stop me and ask any questions along the way. So I'm going to skip over the recommendations at a deep level, but I'm just going to highlight what you're going to hear in just a moment. So after we fielded the study and did some analysis on it, it resulted in these recommendations. So phase one, what we're recommending is really implementing a change management framework. Phase two is all about supporting people through data literacy, data training, standing up some processes. And then phase three is about reassessment and remeasurement to see how we're doing. So let's get into the details to see how we came to those recommendations. So as I said a moment ago, digital transformation is really about these pillars that you're seeing depicted on the screen. And so with our survey design, we captured metrics to assess each of these areas. We had overall assessments as well as what I'll call attributes of people, process, etc. And so people attributes would get into things like feeling like there's succession planning, feeling like they're supported with training opportunities. Process would be things like having standard operating procedures in place, having a process if something's not working well, a process to follow. Data would be things like having access to data, having data that I trust. Reporting would be things like being able to get the reports that you need from systems. And then Oracle and Dimensions were the two specific budgetary and grant reporting platforms that we dived into in more depth. And that was looking at the features and functionality of those platforms to understand how users were interacting with them and if they were able to get the information they needed from those platforms. We also had open-ended questions in the survey, and you'll see that in just a little bit. The questions that I just mentioned to you, we asked on a 5-point agreement scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It was a fully labeled scale. And so these percentages that you're seeing underneath each of the pillars, these reflect top 2 box percentages. So the percentage of respondents that are answering strongly agree or agree to those top 2 most positive scale points. Percentages in red are top 2 box scores that were below 40%. And measurements in this orange were 40% or higher. So what we can see at a glance here, process was by far our lowest performing pillar of digital transformation. Followed by people, but there's a deeper story here that's not quite told by this percentage, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Followed by Oracle, and then data reporting and dimensions coming in as our higher performing areas. So let's dive into this a little bit more deeply. So the analytics that we apply to get to these scorecards that I'm about ready to show you, we didn't just look at performance scores. We did some deeper diving, some advanced modeling to understand not just how these different attributes of people or process or platform, how Boulder County Public Health is doing on those, but rather we looked at correlation coefficients to try to understand those measures that were most associated with digital transformation. Then what we did to come up with the strategic priority analysis, we married together the strength of that association with the performance. And the reason why I tell you that is because it should give you some sense that these things that you work on should have a positive impact on your digital transformation journey. So the first thing we started with was taking a look at people. People are the foundation for driving forward digital strategy and transformation. And so one of the things that's hardest across any client we ever work with is getting employees on board with digital transformation. Sometimes when we hear digital transformation, it starts to create those insecurities about what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my job? Is it going to change how I do my job today? So when you see low scores there, it can be very difficult to change. The fantastic news for Boulder County Public Health is that is where your strongest scores resided. So that is this leverageable strength area. You very much scores in this box exceeded 70%, which is fantastic. And we had some that went even far higher than that. That is one of the most difficult things to change. So the fact that your leadership has done such a great job of conveying to employees that digital transformation is critical to the job and getting that employee buy-in is a really strong step in the right direction. We also heard that employees are open to adopting new technology and that they regard data and analytics as critical to performing their work. Now, where we have a little bit of work to do, and some of this might seem in slight conflict to what I just said, is with digital transformation, there is a lot of change management. So sometimes as leaders, we think that we've communicated something, we've iterated what the plan is. But when we're going through change, we have to communicate time and time again. So this primary focus area, these are measures that had a strong association with digital transformation, but performance was lower on those metrics. And by that, I mean the top 2 box performance score fell below that 40% threshold. So that was things like change management support, having a formal change management team, having communication, hearing from leadership about what plans are. These secondary focus areas are performance scores that were in that 40% to 70% range. So they're impactful to your digital transformation journey, but performance, while maybe not as strong as we would hope to see, wasn't some of your lowest performing areas. And that included things like our clients experience the benefits of innovation and receiving needed training and support. In the interest of time today, I'm not going to go through all the quotes that we heard from employees, but what you'll see across the scorecards that I'm getting ready to present, we have included key open-ended comments, quotes directly from your employees to try to shed a little bit more light on these areas of focus that I'm sharing this evening. So some of our recommendations here are to over communicate. Anytime you're going through that digital transformation journey, communicate, 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 and probably creating a formal change management process as part of that. Talk about why new technology is being adopted. Hear employee voice, get them involved in the process. All of those things to bring people along really help with any sort of change management on your digital transformation journey. Are there any questions about people before I move on to process? Any surprises? So next, we took a look at process. So you get people to come along, but then we have to support great people with sound process. So processes enable people to perform their work effectively. Our scores here were lower, meaning those top 2 box percentages fell below that 40% threshold. And we saw that those measures had a strong correlation with digital transformation. So some of our lowest scores reported were seeing errors with work, not having the internal processes that were needed to effectively carry out work, And then things like needing succession planning, how team members come together when there's a problem to address the problem and to see the work through, and then having documentation in place. So often what we find here on the process front, it can be as simple as making sure you have standard operating procedures in place, making sure the team understands handoffs that happen, making sure the team understands escalation processes. So one thing we're suggesting here is something called a quality council. So a quality council can be a good step in getting those processes, those SOPs, succession planning in place. And the one thing I would comment about standing up something like a quality council, I would highly recommend it not just be represented by management. Get your individual contributors part of that council. It helps them to make sure their voice is heard and helps with that buy-in. And then you can use them to bring along their peers in that process. Any questions about process?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Amy. I have a quick
Hi.
question for you. I think some of this goes, so I'm Strategic Initiatives Director, and I think some of this comes back to, I think there are processes in place. I don't think we do a good enough job in teaching people to A, where to find those, and B, to look for those. I think that that's an important aspect. And I also feel that we need to include this in the processes. A lot of times there are hurdles that come through broader county. They have to give the go ahead or whatnot, right? Legal and things like that. So I think sometimes that slows down, or HR has to provide input and they're overwhelmed. They won't do that for a week or so. So I think building those into some of that makes sense. But I think we have a lot of good processes. I don't think we do a good job communicating and having people understand where those are at and how they look at it.
You know, it's such an interesting comment. You know, so many times, this is not unique to all of you. We hear time and time again, the documentation exists, it's out there. Why is no one using it? And sometimes it's, whenever you're dealing with situations like this, communicate, communicate, communicate. And the other thing I might suggest, do you have a knowledge management system that you use to house your documentation?
You do.
Okay. So maybe some reinforcing that that's where documentation is stored for new hire onboarding, kind of get them involved in it right away, make sure, some training with the knowledge management system as part of that process. Have you tried any of those tactics in the past?
Yeah, but I think they weren't enough. I think we need to do a better job at it. So yeah, all those places are spot on.
Recognizing it as part of it. So you're making great headway there. Just keep focused on it and dial into the communication. Communication is a fundamental piece of the digital transformation journey. Are there any other questions or comments about process? Data. This was one of the overall better scoring areas, but we did see some additional low scores here. And those low scoring areas were access to data and trust of the data. And so what we heard here is that people aren't trusting the data in systems. So people are reverting back to maybe things like Excel spreadsheets rather than going into the platforms and gathering reports from those sources. So skepticism with the platforms causing trust in using them. We also heard feedback that there was inconsistent access to financial data. disconnected data silos that were prohibitive to sharing cross-functional insights, and not being clear about who owned data. So one complement to a quality council could be a data governance committee. Have you all tried anything with standing up data governance in the past?
Great question. So we're looking at, this is Kelly again. So we're looking at, there's a countywide data governance system, right? But this has been flagged as an area that needs to be worked on, in particular, as we look at data modernization. And I think part of this aspect also, I know you're talking about finances, but it's also connecting performance
Yes.
connected to finances. So we're in the process of building a performance management system, which this agency really hasn't had in the past, or at least not something that's robust and can be looked at across the agency. So being able to look at those spaces is something that is definitely on our radar. But yeah, the governance system, I think our IT people are all over that. I think we have to sell that a bit more, both to leadership and to staff, what that looks like and what it needs.
You know, thinking about it as early as you can in the process. And the reason why I say that, the more data we collect across, whether it be a performance management system or a budgetary and grant reporting platform or whatever the case might be, the more data we start collecting, the more overwhelming it can feel to start to harness governance. Prior to joining CLA, I was with a large healthcare system here in Indianapolis and 16,000 employees across the state of Indiana. And one of my first tasks as heading up data and analytics was I was told by my boss, the chief transformation officer, that I was going to have to stand up data governance across that entire network. It felt a little overwhelming to get started. But the best advice I can give you is take one step forward. Just start building it one step at a time. And data governance, you know, there's frameworks that CLA that I am happy to work with you on. If that's of interest, happy to partner with your IT team on that, because it can seem like a very overwhelming undertaking, but great reporting that you can take actions on the information. It really starts with well-housed and well-curated data. If you haven't taken those steps, if the data is dirty, it manifests as what you're seeing on this screen: access issues and trust. And you want people to trust, you have to trust the data, right? You're going to be making critical decisions on it, and you want your employee base to utilize the platforms that you're putting at their fingertips to help them do their job better. Reporting, we saw some of the similar information that we saw with data. So our lowest scoring areas were the ability to make real-time decisions and the quality of the information. And I felt like that really coincided with the story that we were seeing with data too. If we don't have employees trusting the systems, trusting the information that's coming out of those systems, and we're reverting back to things like Excel spreadsheets, that's going to delay your time to decision making. And we know being able to make those fast decisions, there's a cost involved with being able to do that. So I felt like the story we were seeing on reporting really aligned very well with what we were seeing with the data story. A few attributes where we did see scores go up a bit on those top two box scores, and that meaning higher than 40%, were actionable information. So if we are getting employees into the system, what they're getting out of the platforms, they're regarding it as actionable. Those employees that are getting into the platforms, they feel confident with decision making and confident with accuracy. Any questions on reporting? And then the last two areas that we took a look at were Oracle and Dimensions, the platforms we were evaluating. And as we saw, those really were not our lowest scoring areas as we looked at that digital landscape. And so one thing that was very interesting here, so if you take a look at those primary focus areas, our lowest ratings were easy to navigate, integration, quality data, and analytics. So when I saw these really low scores and saw some of the feedback that we heard from employees, I sometimes when you look at these scores, it's easy to take this at face value and be like, oh, Oracle's not delivering. It doesn't have these features and functionality that we need. Previous life, previous job, Oracle was a key platform that we used for data and analytics. So I had some pretty deep insight into Oracle. Oracle has very sophisticated features and functionality. And in the PDF report, I think I included a table that shows features and functionality of Oracle and dimensions. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is interesting. When we see features and functionality that we know a platform possesses, but that employees are rating as low, what that starts to speak to for me is the need for more training. Getting employees holding their hands as we implement new platforms and making sure they're comfortable in how to interact with it, but also making sure it's configured to the way you need it to be configured to make it work for you. I tell some of the teams I work with today, technology is meant to work for us. It's meant to work hard for us. We're not meant to work hard for technology. It defeats the purpose of it. A very similar story with dimensions, really a consistent story with Oracle. So again, what I would encourage here is making sure those two platforms are configured to work hard for you and then doing some training internally. And I did hear, I think one of the conversations that Armando and I had was we do offer trainings, but then we have some attendance issues with it. That's something else. One of the things I did at the healthcare system, I was charged with rolling out a data literacy training. We were trying to get our employee base into Power BI. And as you can imagine, clinicians, doctors, there was some resistance to adding that to their day. So we came up with some strategies with getting them into the system. So I'm happy to share that along the way too, if that's of interest. I'm wrapping up quickly because I know you have a full agenda today. Are there any questions on Oracle and dimensions for me? And so what we're recommending is a path to transformation. A lot of that communication and change management that you've heard about, looking to do training, data literacy trainings, platform trainings, and platform configuration. Again, making sure those platforms are working for you. And then phase 3 would be about reassessment, checking in. How is it going? How are people adopting tools? Are we seeing scores increase from what you're seeing in this report? So, what questions do you have for me?
I always have one, sorry.
That's good.
So one of the things is capacity, right? These are all great suggestions. One is capacity. Do we have the capacity to do some of these things? And so not right now, but later on, I would like to connect with you to talk about or have thoughts around prioritization of some of these spaces because that there's capacity issues in these as well. So that's my comment.
This can seem very overwhelming. You know, I'm listing this out as 3 phases with a couple of bullet points underneath each. It makes it seem like it's nice and tidy and just easy to do. It's not. So that prioritization question is an important one. And I'm happy to connect. This is a very similar journey to what I went on at that healthcare system. And I did this with a leadership team of 4 people and 75 people underneath me, but it was largely led out with that leadership team. So I am happy to connect at any time that you're ready and we can put our heads together on how to prioritize this.
Great.
I don't think there's any questions, Amy. Thank you.
Yes, and if you all think of anything after the fact, Armando has my contact information. You know, I do want to say thank you and really congratulate all of you for going on this journey. It can be an intimidating one to bring in somebody from the outside to evaluate how you're doing on your digital transformation journey. And the team was an absolute pleasure to work with. So thank you for allowing CLA to come in and work with you on your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy, yeah,
Okay.
I want to thank you too. This is something that we've been really interested in prioritizing in the organization. So I really appreciate all of the groundwork that you all did to help us get a handle on where we might be successful in focusing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay. Nice to meet you all. Have a good evening.
Get started.
Yeah, that's my spirit.
Just to add a little bit to that last presentation. So there is a recommendation. We've been working heavily on the change management within finance. So there's a lot of changes, a lot of the process improvements that we are currently doing, which would address some of the recommendations. So we'll bring that forward. If they have any additional questions, we can definitely answer.
Mondo, if I can make a comment, I was going to say there's been a lot of progress in those areas already since April, just as someone who's a staff member. So I just want to make.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining today's Boulder County Public Health budget study session for the proposed 26 budget. Today, we'll be walking through the financial landscape as we're facing the challenges and the constraints that have brought us here, and the strategies we're using to align our resources with our mission. Our focus will be balancing fiscal responsibility and protecting the services our community rely on. And mostly, let's get started. And please, if you have questions while I'm reading my script, please ask them. I'll stop. I'll try to be as politically correct. That's why I try to stick to the script. So today's budget retreat, we'll walk through our proposed 2026 budget. And the objective today is really straightforward: provide a clear picture of our financial outlook for 2026, including our revenue projections, expenditure plans, and how we want to align with our strategic priorities. Ensure alignment with the board's expectations before we finalize and submit our budget to the county, which is really what I'm asking for today, is making sure that we align and that we have your support to move forward. This opportunity for us is to review these numbers, discuss the assumptions behind them, and to confirm that the proposed plan reflects both our fiscal realities and our commitment to protecting the health of our community. So here's a quick look at today's session. I am going to talk about the 25 financials, a brief snapshot. I did have that presentation last week, so very, very similar, kind of a repeat. I will also go into more of the 26 budget, covering the economic operations and the funding realities we're navigating. And next, I shall apply or show you how we apply the priority-based budgeting to guide strategic choices. I won't go into depth with the priority-based budgeting, but I'll at least give a quick highlight how we ended up with our 26 projected budget. Good. So for the 2026 budget, here's a snapshot of the combination of external pressures and deliberate internal decisions. First, we're facing reduced grant funding across several programs, including WIC, environmental health programs, communicable disease prevention, which limits the external revenues that we rely on to run these programs. Second, personal costs are rising due to market pressures, salary adjustments, benefit increases. And since personnel makes up a large part of our budget, even small percentages can have a major impact. Third, we're continuing our post-COVID right sizing, aligning staffing levels with long-term growth trends over the past decade and current service demands. And fourth, we're improving budget agility by recalibrating the balance between operational and personnel costs so we can respond more quickly to challenges if they emerge next year. And despite these constraints, our guiding principles haven't changed. Protect essential public health services, keep our core work strong, allocate resources equitably, and ensure funding goes where it's most needed, and maintain long-term fiscal sustainability. And I repeat that, really, that's really what we're really trying to do is this long-term sustainability or fiscal sustainability for the next 2 to 3 years is what we're really looking at. So our focus is long-term resilience, ensuring that our budget strategy supports sustainability and impact. In the past, we've used incremental budgeting. As you recall, this is an old slide presented a couple times. We moved to a base budget for 2025, where we were able to look at historical data over the last 3 years, and we were able to reduce about 5% from our operational budget, which helped us structure some of the imbalances. But in 26, we went further. Some of it was forced from external and some of it was internal. And we went into priority-based budgeting. I'll talk a little bit about priority-based budgeting, but really what we did is evolve from the base budgeting to a more practical and more strategic form, which is the priority-based budgeting. So how do we apply priority-based budgeting? We used it in 26 to balance our budget, and it was deliberate and strategic way, like I said earlier. First, we held or eliminated vacant positions. By pausing and removing certain positions, we reduce personal costs while ensuring the essential services continued without disruption. Next, we are reallocating staff or higher priority or mandating programs. This means our most critical public health functions remain fully supported, even with all the adjustments in staffing levels. We also reduce discretionary spending in areas that we cut our minimum and have the minimum impact to service delivery. This allowed us to preserve the programs that most affect our community. And finally, we staggered program spending. We've been looking at funding coming in, so we've drawn in a lot of the federal funding. So we've expedited some of the drawdowns on our revenues to really highlight some of the fund balance that we're looking at and hopefully get us through for the next 2 years. So how do we develop the 26 budget? So if you recall, we used priority-based budgeting and prior slides in prior meetings, we talked about the tools that we used. So I'm not going to talk about the tools, but I do want to talk about the 3 scenarios. And it's important because we're going to go back to the scenarios because I think we can use the scenarios next year as we have a bunch of recommendations. So we gave every division manager 3 scenarios with some reliable numbers for them to go back to their divisions and look at their budgets. The first scenario was an 11 to 16% reduction. We thought that was really in line with the 10-year fiscal or the 10-year financials. When we looked at the financials, we looked at inflation. We went even further to about a 20%. Where really looking at that, we really wanted to be at the 20% when we looked at the financials also for the last 10 years, being a little bit more conservative, but no growth. And then we went to the third scenario, which is a 25 reduction. Originally, that third scenario was a 33% reduction, which was worst case scenario, looking at every grant going away, which was worst case scenario. But we wanted to make sure that we had something in place that we weren't reacting if it did really get to that third scenario. So with that said, the division managers came back and gave all these recommendations. We ran them all through a feasibility test. And that's how we started developing the 26 budget. With that, we held multiple meetings with the division managers. They worked with their teams and ultimately gave us a base, how we were going to structure each division for the 2026 budget. Any questions? Am I going too quick? I know it. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the philosophies that we use for the priorities. So first programs with the ability to generate sustainable revenue should be self-sustaining. We ran fee analysis on all programs that have some type of fee associated. So we have now a portfolio of every single program that require or that runs or that collects fees. And so we did sustainability analysis on the fees. So we do have that. That's very important. So these programs are expected to cover their own costs without relying on general fund support. Example, we have permitting. So we're looking at that right now. We will come back to the board to talk about the philosophy and how much do we subsidize. But we at least now have that portfolio to give us that data, that information to make data decisions. Next, we look closely at our mandated services to ensure that are operating at appropriate service levels and supported by revenue. These include identifying opportunities for process improvement, revenue generation to enhance efficiency. So we do have a list about 33 process improvements that we'll be working on this fall to make sure that we are adapting to what the analysis is showing and where appropriately should be leveled or service level. We have a lot of programs that we do beyond what is expected. And I think with times of, with the times that have changed, so we really need to go back in there and make the appropriate service level changes. And then the next thing we did is for non-mandate programs that rely on dedicated grant funding, we made sure that we are right sizing them. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple of our divisions and how they're making some organizational changes. And lastly, we recognize that the high priority programs, especially those with significant community impact, may not have any self-sustainable funding or revenue coming in. And so what we're willing to do is look at our flexible funding as we look at all revenue coming into this organization and help subsidize some of those programs because we know they have a big impact on the community. So this framework ensures that we're aligning resources with values, maintaining financial responsibility, and preserving key services that matter most to the community. Strategic priority. Even with the necessary budget reductions, we remain committed to advancing our strategic priorities that directly impact the health and well-being of our community. First, health equity remains a top focus. We are targeting underserved and high-risk populations to ensure that our public health services reach those who need the most. This includes programs that address disparities in access, outcome, and resources. And second, we are continuing data monetization efforts. As you heard earlier, we have some good recommendations. We want to improve our data systems and reporting capabilities. We increase transparency, enhance operational efficiencies, and support informed decision-making across the organization, which is very important. And finally, we prioritize staff retention and development. Our people are the most valuable resource, and we're committed to retaining expertise, providing professional development, ensuring the workforce has the capacity and skills needed to deliver essential services. With that said, we're running a lot of process improvements and making sure that we are looking at capacity, which is important for our human capital, and making sure that we don't have burnout, making sure we're doing more with less, but without a cost. People obviously in the organization is most important. These priorities guiding every decision we made, ensuring that even in constrained budget environments, we protect the programs and capacities that matter most to our community. Okay, let's get started with some numbers. So I do want to talk a little bit about 2025. Last week, we did talk about where we're at mid-year, and this slide really just iterates the exact same thing. So in 2025, we adopted our budget at $24,427,936. Like I said, it was a 5% reduction, which was about 1.5 million. And we also looked at reducing all our operations to balance the budget. One of the things I want to point out in 25, because I'll go back to a slide later on, is if you look at under fund balance, there's a line item that says reserve. So in order for us to balance our 25 budget, we used $2.1 million to balance our budget, 25. We knew that was an expectation at the time just because of the environment that we're in. And so that obviously also is going to draw from our fund balance, which is going to be critical for the next 2 years. And I'll talk about that when I go into projections. And so I want you to remember that number because I will talk about 26 and the difference and compare how, the direction we're heading for 26. So right now with revenues, we're coming in on spot. We're about 100% within budget. We're continue looking at the revenues coming in, even with a lot of the funding environment that we're in. We're still seeing grants coming in. We've pulled a lot of those grants a lot earlier, but we are still seeing all the revenue coming in. We have slightly over fund balance right now because the county sends their transfer over in a full amount, but you have to disperse that over 12 months when you do a projection. So revenues are coming in on point. That just is an important point because if we weren't in the environment that we're in, I would say that we projected our revenue pretty close. So that means projections came in well. That means the finance team obviously did they did the work by looking at the projections over the last couple of years and came up with a really good number. Unfortunately, we know times have changed, so slightly different for 2026 with all the changes that we'll be bringing for the 26 budget. Also with expenditures right now, expenditures are coming in slightly lower, and that's actually done artificially because that's what we've been doing with cost control. So right now we're in about 672,000 favorable, which will continue to try to actually increase that number slightly different than I would say in a normal year because I want to be within 2% of the budget. But I know that I'm really actually trying to come in under budget just so I can preserve the fund balance, the 2.1 million that I talked about. I'm trying to preserve that so I don't have to draw that down for the beginning of 2026. So slightly different. It's a little bit contradicting, but it is a strategy so I can preserve for the next 2 years. So we'll talk about that in 26. But that's kind of where we're at right now with the 2025 budget. Any questions? I know this was last week's presentation, so nothing new. So I do want to talk about revenues. So slightly different this year. We took a very conservative approach when it came to revenues. We have our standardized revenues that tend to come every year. And those are a little easier, the more stable, consistent. For example, our county, we kept the county transfer, anything that comes in from general fund flat, knowing that we believe that they're going to be coming in consistent. I do want to talk a couple of revenues that have slightly some different changes. So, for example, our S tax was reduced by 34,000. We're looking at some of the other outside revenue coming in. One of the biggest revenues that I want to talk about is that grant. If you look at that number, that 34% of our revenue is made up from grants. That if you look at this whole pie chart, that 34% to me is probably the most liability within our own budget, just because of the inconsistency, what we don't know kind of thing right now, the unknown for next year. So that's really what I'm looking at to make sure that we have a plan B. We're not reactive and we can sustain the organization next year and the following year. What we did with grants is slightly different. We tend to go out to the divisions and kind of get their feedback and look at their grants. This year we did that, but we also did a 25% reduction. We're starting to see a 25% reduction in the majority of grants that are coming in from the feds. So with that, we kind of did a straight line. Of course, we know some that are guaranteed if they've been awarded or we already have an award letter. Obviously, we booked those correctly as a projection, but anything else, we did a straight line 25% reduction. Slightly conservative, I understand that, but I think we need to be aggressive when we do this projection for revenues just to be safe next year. One of the things that I've heard also from divisions is like we can always increase. I can come back to y'all during next year as a budget amendment. If I get more money in, more revenue, I can always increase. But this year, this is the direction we're heading. And so this is slightly different than we've done in the past, but this is part of the 26 budget. And so as you can see, still really relying on the county at 34%. And then the second largest is that grant, which is to me is the highest risk. So we'll continue looking at that. The other thing that we looked at is the fees at 11%, some of the process improvements and some of the things that we're looking at to increase fees. And when I say increase, that means either getting more fees in, not increasing directly the fee because we're doing process analysis to really look at that. And the fee analysis to really recommend those type of changes, but really just building the capacity to be able to bring in more fees. So that really is the work scope that we're looking at. So those usually take a year to two. I know for environmental health, we have a couple of fees that they believe they'll be collecting a little bit more just based on the changes, but we won't see those until about end of 26, end of 27. And one thing that I pointed out is the 34% grant that we depend on. There's 48 FTEs that are associated to those in 2026. So really looking at those grants to make sure that they're coming in because they do affect 48 FTEs. Right. So this is the source and use, and this is probably the most important slide in this whole presentation. So I'm going to walk y'all through it with a comparison. Usually you only see the year, but just because this is a special year, it's slightly different. I wanted to show the comparison of where we were at or where we're at currently and where we're going in 2026. So obviously, when you look at the sources, you look at the three sources we use: our grants and fees, our sustainability tax funding, and then our county transfers, right? If you add those up in 2025, we were short in order to balance our expenditures. So we had to put in $2.1 million to balance our budget for 2025. If you look at 26, what we are actually recommending this year, slightly different. We are recommending only to use 7.6 or 766,477 from fund balance to balance our budget. And so we are recommending a $20,640,980 budget, which is a 3.7 million reduction from 2025. That also is a 64% reduction from fund balance to balance our budget, which means we're using a lot of flexible funding. We were able to move positions around. Yes, thank you. Go over one more. One more. There you go. So if you take a look at that, that's huge. That's a big gain at 64% reduction. That means we're not relying on the general fund to balance our budget. So fiscally very responsible, and fiscally really sets us up for the next 2 years. As I go into the fund balance to discuss that, I can tell you that that really is going to help us move us for the next 2 years. If you look at the uses, every single division, for the most part, had a slight decline or decrease. So if you could take a look at it, we'll talk about those individually, but overall, from going from the 24 to a $20 million budget, you saw personnel and operations still slightly balanced. Our budget is slightly unbalanced, but knowing that because of all the changes and the reductions, it's an opportunity for us to continue looking at our budgets. I think process improvements will really help with the capacity to really align our staffing with our programs and our new budgets. Questions on that? That's probably the biggest or the most important slide that I want to kind of talk about and kind of hear from the board in regards to, were you expecting this? Is this your expectation? And moving us down with the fund balance at a 64% reduction, slightly not zero, as a discussion we had prior, but I think it's very close to getting us to be a little bit more sustainable.
I mean, I'll jump in here
Okay.
Before you move in and just, I know we can have some comments and questions at the end, but I do think this is in line with what the board policy is that we passed. What was that, two years ago now? A year and a half ago, I think, where we really tried to emphasize our desire to keep a 15% budget reserves and to not rely on that for our ongoing operations, right? That those are emergency funds. So I appreciate the work that has gone into getting us much closer to not relying on that general fund reserves for our annual operations.
Absolutely. It's been very difficult. I got to say that, but I think overall, it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of numbers, and I think just division managers have really put in a lot of thought to this to get us to this number. So. One more. So this is kind of the same, just highlight the difference in the budget and the reduction. So I really want to talk about, we hit the 16%. If you recall that slide a couple of slides ago, scenario one, we hit the 16%, which is a $3.7 million reduction. I just want to add to that. We did a 5% in 24 to 25. So in reality, public health over the last 2 years have reduced their budget by 21%. That is a lot. That's a big reduction. And just to say that there's going to be opportunity really for us to look at our organization and agency next year, because we really don't know the final impact that this is going to have. I think we need to be careful and disclose that. We make projections, we make all these assumptions, but I think we're really going to have to, take a look at our own organization next year or the agency and see how's it affecting the public, our community, because that's a huge number. That's, almost 40, what is that? Almost 4 million, or a little bit over 4.2 million. What is it for? It's 21%. So it's a huge cut. So just wanted to point that out as important to bring this out to everybody to take a look at that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact. So let's walk through 3 major components of the proposed budget. First, personnel change. We're proposing a reduction or transition of 30 FTEs across the agency. These changes are primarily on non-mandated or grant-dependent programs, and they've been carefully planned to minimize disruption in essential services. Where possible, we're focusing on redeployment and natural attrition rather than immediate layoffs. Second, process improvements. We identified 33 process improvement opportunities, most of them within environmental health. They are aimed at streamlining workflows, reducing duplication, leveraging technology to improve efficiencies. The goal is to maintain or even improve service quality with fewer resources. And originally it started off with 33, mostly from environmental health, but that number has actually grown. I think every division has at least some type of process improvement in place. We've kind of changed some of the scope of the business office manager, who is currently going to be receiving his black belt in Lean Sigma, and we're using him kind of as the change agent to go out there and help these divisions to make sure that we follow through with these process improvements, because a reduction in a budget is only one part of this overall equation for sustainability. We also have to take care of our operations and making sure that we're looking at capacity, making sure that we're looking at our processes, and making sure that we're improving overall the services on top of just the reduction. And then third, revenue generations. We developed 17 recommendations to enhance revenue with a strong focus on fee-based programs. This includes aligning fees with actual cost of service, improving billing processes, and exploring new revenue streams. These steps will help us move toward greater financial sustainability over time. This is also a work in progress. We've identified them, but with revenue, they tend to take a little bit longer. So we did not use any of those revenue generating recommendations in any of our projections for the revenues for 2026, as I think it's premature. But as we start developing some infrastructure behind some of those, I can definitely see them maybe taking in effect at the end of fourth quarter in 2026, or really looking at 27 to see if there's opportunity to bring in that revenue, just so we can balance out that fund balance. So lots of changes, a lot to consider as far as we looked at all the recommendations. And I think it was a very difficult process using priority-based budgeting. I'm glad we had a tool to be consistent, but very difficult decisions, and ultimately having to make difficult decisions to make sure that we balance a clean budget. So I do want to talk about this table. I'm going to read it just so I can make sure that I'm clear. So this table is a slide of really a full summary of our proposed 26 budget by division. And it doesn't paint the full picture when I read the script, and I want to be careful because it's kind of it's a net. So as you see a reduction at the bottom and you look at reduction to the right for each division, it doesn't completely tell its true story. There was divisions in there where maybe we added a position from another division, or we subtract a position from a division and added it to another, or split the position. So all that is not in, it doesn't, you can't really illustrate that because what we're looking at is the straight number. So I just want to be clear of that. So what I want to highlight is the tremendous effort by all division managers in contributing to the overall 16% reduction. It's important to note that the table reflects a net change only, which means it doesn't fully capture the scale of adjustments made within each division. For example, environmental health experienced a 20% reduction, but because they also absorbed additional programs, the net impact you'll see is only a 9% reduction in their expenditures. So that's kind of true for a couple other divisions. I just want to highlight that because I think that's important. For example, with administration and finance, a small program within administration and finance also had some realignment of positions, which probably was about 20% in reductions, but you only see a 10% because it's all rolled up under finance, procurement, leadership. So you only see a 10% in admin and finance. So not completely clear, but at least it gives you a overall net. So I just wanted to bring that. I also want to clarify that the FTE numbers shown are budgeted FTEs. So that's not head count, it's budget FTEs. As we transition to a more traditional FTE accounting model, we'll be able to do a 1-for-1, but right now it's based on, we have full-time individuals anywhere from, 0.6, 0.8. So you add all those up, but still there's still a reduction there. If you take a look at the 25 adopted budget, 162.2 budgeted FTEs. In 26, our proposed is 132.4 budgeted FTEs. So there was, a big reduction that we're looking to happen in 26. And keep in mind, a lot of these are transitions. So that means there's attrition, vacant positions, you have term positions, and you have a couple layoffs. So that number is also, I don't want to represent that number and scare. It was a mixture of different types of decisions that we had to make to get to that number. Any questions? So I wanted to also show that same table in a pie chart, just to kind of show you where we're at with the budget. This is obviously a pie chart with all the divisions, and I wanted to kind of point out admin and finance slightly there. You'd be about 15 to 30% is where you want to be. I thought that was important to show where we did a lot of reduction there to make sure that we're in line within our budget and making sure that we have the proper staffing to be able to support all the divisions. You can also see that everybody there, slightly your more mandated environmental health, more of the mandated programs, slightly bigger budget at 29%. And then some of your smaller ones that really depend on grants are the smaller divisions, as you can see, but overall represented by everybody in all the grants. So it's a good picture to see kind of how our budget is built. One thing that I want to talk about is the assumptions. When we built this budget, we took a 5% adjustment for a cost of living, merit, and benefits. That right now is a estimate that we're using, but we will get a better number from the county. We follow what the county provides in there, so we'll definitely put that in there. The other thing I want to talk about is we reduced unfunded operations by 25%. So what we ended up doing is when we put all the numbers together, looked at all the flexible funding, we also went back. We did this last year. We looked at the last 3 years actuals, and then we looked at this year's. We ended up cutting 25% of our operations overall, except with when I say unfunded operating expenses, is that unless it's like a grant funded division or program, that obviously is restricted to use that for operations. But otherwise, anybody else that was using some type of flexible funding that comes in from the county or any reserve, we did a straight 25%. based on kind of what we were spending and the cost controls, we feel that that is adequate and we can still provide the same service without affecting our services in 2026. And then lastly, hourly position. So we're moving to that model where it's full-time and anybody would be hourly under 0.5. And so we put a budget in the operating to kind of use that as an aggregate number for them to use as a bucket to be able to manage their hourly positions. Questions? I think this is probably the one of the second most important slides that I hear for the board, and that's that fund balance. So I want to talk a little bit about the fund balance slide. So in 26, based on what I showed on the sourcing use, that $20.6 million budget for 2026, this is my assumption, and I think this is very important for anybody watching this presentation, is this is what's going to get us through 26 and 27. Very important, I think, based on the projections. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the assumptions, and then I'll talk about the chart itself. So we're assuming that we use the 2.1 million. As you recall, that's not what I want to happen. We're doing cost control, but this assumption is based that we're going to use the 2.1 million for 25 budget that we currently are. We're assuming that expenditures remain within budget. So that's that cost control that we're currently doing, and we know that we're already slightly favorable. PB recommendations reduce the need to use the fund balance in the future. So I talked about moving from the 2.1 million to a 766,000 in 2026. And to keep this simple, I used it for 27, knowing that the board has given us different direction. We're doing process improvements. We might be able to adjust that next in 27, but right now we're going to keep it pretty flat. And second of all, we want to begin our fund. We're going to say we're going to begin our fund balance based on the 2025. So knowing that that assumption's been changed now because of while we're actually managing our cost control. So I think that's improved already. And lastly is we want to make sure that we're monitoring the PV recommendations for potential savings. And then everything that we recommended for the PBB for 2026 has to be implemented day 1, January 1st, 2026, in order for this to really work. Okay. Go ahead and click on that. So we're going to talk. Yeah. So the last part is I'm going to say this again. We're reducing 64% of our fund balance. I think that is very important to highlight.
Expenditures. Yeah.
So that is that's our fund balance. It's a reduction of 64%. We went from 2.1 to 766,000. So I want to point that out. That is a huge drop in fund balance and reliance that we've been using. So with that said, I believe that if we end the year as is, which I think it's already favorable for 2026, with a balanced budget of 20,600,000, we'll have a 17% reserve. Our reserve will be 17% entering in 2026. Okay. If we continue in that same flat budget for 2026 into 2027, I estimate will be also about a 15% policy or reserve policy at 15% for 2027, which means right now I feel pretty comfortable if we stay on course that we'll have the next 2 years covered. If nothing else hits, like, we lose every grant possible out there and we stay pretty flat with our revenues and our fees, we'd be able to manage the next 2 years and hopefully stabilize the agency instead of doing this every year. So we can at least go back to what this agency is good at is the community, right? What we provided the community. And then that way our divisions are worried about service and not worried about how do we trim up the budget? How do we, deal with change management? How do we, deal with our employees? So really just trying to stabilize us to get us to the next 2 years. And then depending on if we start doing some of these process improvements, revenue, then we can start looking at 28. I'm pretty comfortable that we can probably capture 28, but I didn't want to be that aggressive. I thought 2 years is probably a good starting point to get us through the next 2 years. Questions? It's a lot. Sorry.
a lot on like the blue assigned, right, going from the 2.1 to the 766. We didn't really touch much on the green unassigned funds, the decreases we're seeing there too.
Yes, which is not good because it's it's unassigned, but we don't want to try to touch it, but we're using it. But you're absolutely right. Even though it decreased, I'd want it to kind of stay higher, but it's not because we're using some of that fund balance from this 2025. But you're absolutely right. Next year it'll probably be higher because of some of the cost savings that we're going to have, because that's going to be our contingency money. Like if something goes wrong, for example, let's say we lose all the grants, that's where I'm going to be pulling from. That's an important number, I guess. That's the emergency number we don't want to talk about, but that's where we'd go to say, hey, we need another 3 million. I'm going to pull from there. You think from the board, I mean, is that your expectations? Because I've constantly hear, about the percentage, and I wanted to make sure that we're addressing that in your expectations.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll jump in here and say, I think the silence that you are hearing from the board is one, this is great because it aligns with the direction we've given you, but also like trying to really wrap our arms around what this has meant for the department and for this process that you have gone through. So, I think we really applaud the implementation of the policy that we passed and that you have heard us and that we want to move from using that to sustain our operations. And then I think we also just really recognize the size of the sacrifice on the organization too, and want to acknowledge that because this is challenging for the organization.
Armando, I know we're focused on 2026 for this discussion. I'm getting more uncomfortable as we look at the 27 in the fund balance. I assume we're not is there any dependency that we need to factor in today for 26 into 27? I mean, I know you're working on sustainability, but that starts to dip into an area where I think we're going to have a discussion as a board. So I just want to clarify, we're only talking about 26 today, but if there's things that impact 27 and decisions we're making today in terms of fund balance, I think we need to have that conversation.
So I would say that I didn't update this slide, but actually just because we have a favorable 2025, that this slide is outdated at 13.9. It's actually 15. It's a little bit slightly over 15. That 27 will actually be at 15%, because what's happening right now is it's a favorable amount of 600. And if you look at the packet I sent, I believe we're going to come in about 1.3 million favorable, which means we won't draw that 2.1.
Okay.
And so that will roll over for 26 and 27. So I didn't want to say, because I don't want that used against me, but to be able to say,
you don't know until you know.
yeah, as we continue, in a perfect world, if I had the opportunity to just say how I want it to end, I would not use the 2.1, and we're implementing some of these changes. Then that way I'd start 26 with the exact same fund balance of 25, and that would get me out to 28. But I don't want to put that out there because I don't want to be called out to say you said so. This is kind of right now, this is the information I have, but I think it gets better as the year progresses and we become more favorable with our expenditures and the cost control we're doing, that it only improves our sustainability over up to 28. Does that help you out? I don't know if that helps you.
It does. I think the other thing that we're just not, I feel like I didn't fully grasp until this visualization is our percentage of reserve is actually based on a much lower number, right? So it's just interesting. I just want to make sure that we as a board are fully grasping that part too, which is that we actually have less reserve fundamentally, right? So that does not obviate, if something were to happen where we had a one-time crisis, right? Which we all are aware this could happen. We have less to pull from.
Absolutely.
So even though it's the same percentage, so I just want to make sure that those optics are really understood. And I know everyone's nodding and saying yes, but this isn't the same amount of money.
I will also say that we're in such a dynamic state right now with the state and federal government. that I suspect we'll continue to revisit kind of where we are and what the projection is, not once a year, but probably times.
Yeah. And Morgan, I like from the board policy perspective, I think it's raising a question for me, which is it a percentage? Like there's an interesting question here, which is what is an appropriate reserve, right? When your budget is starting to slide into a smaller stratosphere, right? And so like I get the percentage piece, but I start to worry then about the meaningfulness of that number. And the realities of what might happen. And I know it's very hard to predict, but anyway, I think it's just something we need, not for today, but something we need to be thinking about from a policy position longer term as well as a board.
The only thing,
No way to quantify that, right?
No,
Like,
no,
I have
definitely.
no way to anticipate what we would actually need for what scenario, right? And maybe there's some scenario based.
so we do, so I'll talk a little bit about, we have these other scenarios of, if worst case scenarios, what do we do? Like, this is one of the mechanisms, one of the leverages we can do. The other is obviously looking at how our budget is and making those adjustments, offsetting position, things like that. I think there's other things that we can do. One thing that I do want to talk about the reserve percent though is, I wasn't here when y'all adopted it, but this is a GOFA practice. So, I mean, it's directly from, yeah, so you've probably heard it. So I'm not,
In no way am I suggesting
Oh, no.
we're changing policy on this. I'm just trying to kind of get my head around it. As with everything, we're dealing with less funding overall. That includes with the reserve.
correct. Yeah, and that's why maybe towards the end, at beginning of next year, when I come and present fund balance, hopefully we preserved it. That's what I'm trying to do is preserve 25's fund balance. So that way we can so we can extend it for 26, 27, 28. But absolutely, to your point, it's less money. So we really have to make sure that we have a plan B and plan C in place if something does happen and make sure we're ready.
Yeah, and that, like, see, I'm wondering if this is again just for future, not for today, but start to see some scenario planning as a board in terms of if then statements, right? And I'm sure you're collaborating with other counties on these things because I know there's like a lot of cross collaboration given the budget constraints going on across the country in public health. But it would be helpful to know kind of what that dialogue is and what those scenarios look like and how we can best prepare for that.
So I just wanted, this was a good comparison because I know we talked about it, or I brought it up in previous meetings, kind of really trying to get us to that, 70, 30, 80, 20, ratio between personnel and operations. So as you can see here, slightly, obviously, because of all the changes and kind of how we went about with the PVB, it's slightly off. We're about an 85 personnel, 15% operational. Ultimately, we like to, as we continue moving forward, is really addressing some of that with these process improvements. And the reason why is, to your point, Lindy, is in case of an emergency next year, you always want to go to your operations. It's the easiest to cut first. And so right now, if we was to do this next year, we only have a 15%. Okay. And I know we have other leverage and we have other scenarios that we're already thinking about, but that just kind of gives you an idea of where we want to be really sustainable for long term. So just a good picture.
Can I ask Armando about the realisticness of doing that, the reality of doing that in some departments or divisions versus others? Because I always hesitate to lock us into particular percentages because you're just naturally going to have some programs that are more reliant on personnel, and you can't run programs without personnel. So I don't know if you have, I mean, I recognize there's a goal or a best practice, but I think there's also, we need to acknowledge that there's going to be difference between divisions.
Yeah, and I don't think we can fit in the box, right? I think everyone's different, especially being public health. It's heavily personal, right? Personnel, you're dealing with people. But I think there's opportunity within ours. I can tell you, for example, your infrastructure departments like A&F, strategic initiatives. Those are the ones where you capture some of the advantage, or you kind of fix the ratio because you use them as kind of the anchors, and everything else that is front facing, environmental health, community health, CEDAM, and family health can be slightly higher because they're dealing with people, dealing with the community. That's how you kind of fix it. I would even put environmental health in there as far as being able to help that ratio because a lot of theirs is mandatory. So those are positions that you can actually adjust to what the mandate is. So I would say out of our 6, there's 3 that actually can help that ratio. And keep in mind, they say 7, it's just a number, doesn't mean we have to be there. So we just kind of take a look at it. But the thing is, when you're able to adjust that, let's just say you did those 3, it's easier to cut operations than look at personnel.
And I'll just make a couple of additional notes on this slide. One is that operations in the administration and finance category includes operations that benefit all of the divisions. Environmental health has a significant amount of pass-through funding, especially for our food security programs that bumps up that operating proportion. And then, of course, community health, our main objective was to preserve positions this year. And so it took the operating costs were kind of that first go-to try to preserve our staffing.
And then the other thing I would add is as we have this 2-year plan, at least, maybe 3, I think this ratio will gradually correct itself because as we have some term positions that will eventually sunset, that'll also help this ratio. So keep that in mind. So we'll continue looking at it and see what's a good balance. But, these are just numbers baseline numbers that are good to use, but everyone's, every agency is different. So we'll continue monitoring them. But it's good to know where we're at now. I walked in, I didn't have a really good idea. And now at least we're capturing it, we're watching it. So it helps at least Lexi able to make decisions. So these next couple slides can be pretty quick, but I do want to kind of just go through every single division just so you can kind of capture where we're at as far as how the division changed. So for admin and finance, I'm going to do a quick comparison. It was a 10% reduction overall from admin and finance. But what I do want to point out is, I think I talked about it's kind of distorted. Vital records is really where most came from, 37%, and really trying to be self-sustainable. I believe that program itself is about 95% self-sustainable, maybe with a 5% that might be unsustainable, but otherwise it's self-sustaining. So that means it's bringing in its own fees to really recoup 100%. So pretty close. Go to the next one. And I'm going to go pretty quick through these. If you have questions, please stop me. Just on theirs, obviously implemented some workforce optimization and lean. And then vital records really is the one that we really focused on. It was a lot of opportunity based on looking at the fee analysis, and that's where we made a lot of the recommendations. We also looked at aligning infrastructure programs to work with divisions. By that is we looked at our finance, we looked at procurement, and then we also looked at some attrition in regards to the business operations position. So ultimately, overall, a 10% decrease. But I feel pretty comfortable that they're still going to provide the same service. We'll continue evaluating that and making sure that, the service to the divisions does not change. And then also a lot of the automation that we're working on. Those strategic initiatives, as you can see, they had a 7.7% reduction. They had a reduction in one position, which was a attrition, and also had some operational reductions, and that was tied to that position. Otherwise, overall, looking at process improvements, they're also looking at how do they provide services out to the division. They're kind of A&F. That our customers are the division, so making sure that we're providing that same support and overall service to the divisions. Go to the next one. Sorry, I knew it all. I didn't stick to the script. Sorry.
It's on the wall.
Environmental health. a 9.7 reduction. They went from 6.3 million to 5.3 million and reflects a shift toward fee-based services and consolidations. So we did most of the fee analysis on this specific division. We also looked at air quality had a 24%, air quality had a 24% reduction and water quality had a 13% reduction. The cuts aligned with the reduced grant funding through more core monitoring as we continue to monitor. Second is consumer protection. Theirs was a slight growth. So the growth addresses rising demand in food and rental inspections funded by fee increase. So we'll continue reviewing those. We did a full fee analysis on that. They also had some attrition on a position. And then mosquito control, we did actually in 25, we didn't increase it, but we did find out that there's some increases in 2026. So really that program will pretty much be self-sustained, bringing in the fees from the county to allocate to the position and to its services. Overall, there's also their operations is extremely high, but they do have some grants that are big on the operations, kind of throws the numbers off. But otherwise, overall, looking at a lot of process improvements, and then also looking at staffing, making sure that we're doing more with less, or looking at services that should we be doing services, but they're looking at all that. There's a lot of process improvements there.
This is also an area where we're taking a closer look at whether there should be some components integrated into the IGA that we'll continue to explore.
Yeah, there's multiple positions that actually or that we're hopefully to be able to put in the IGA, I think is important. So to Lexi's part. So thank you, Lexi, for reminding me. Go to the next one. And then community health. Community health faced the most severe cut out of all the divisions. What's that? Oh. At 35.3%, which they went from a $3.8 million budget to a $2.5 million budget, and driven really by generations. The youth and mental health reduced by 50%. They went from 604 to 547 due to expired grants. Programs now rely on the dual settlement funds. CSAP, modest 4.9 cut. They went from 925 to 782 and preserved school-based interventions. And then OASIS and TEP programs were consolidated into other line items to reduce overhead. So hard truth is federal earmarks for youth health mental dried up, forcing downsizing. The division will plot a hub model to integrate services with behavior health partners. And they've also been working with Endura and Lexi in a full reorg in community health. So community health will look slightly different in 2026. And I believe Endura is working on KPIs and making sure that we align this program to be able to report out since we are subsidizing some of this program. Anything you want to add to that, Endura?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that we had in community health is, we did have we had extra money from COVID, right? And so in the prior to Armando being here, and our former admin director was very supportive of trying to keep the community health team going, even though they lost their grant funding. And so that actually drove down our reserves, right? Because the grants ended and we were keeping people continuing to do the work. And so we realized that was not sustainable. We probably should have made those shifts about a year ago. And so we felt like it was important to hold a series of retreats and have kind of an honest conversation about what work we need to prioritize and who we need to focus on. And I just want to give a shout out to Heather and the community health leadership team for having those tough conversations. We were able to really say that we do want to prioritize our Latina youth and our LGBTQIA plus youth. So they will still remain a focus, but we're going to have to be more strategic in what we're working on. And one of the areas that really did emerge is one of the contributions that that team has really made to the whole agency is their focus on youth leadership. And so we do want to. And mental and behavioral health. And mental behavioral health. And so we know that these are equity-based programs that do a lot of work in the community. And with youth mental health challenges being on the rise, we felt by staying targeted and focused on these priority populations that we would continue to be able to support the community with that work. So that's kind of, and I think we'll have more to share in the future. But some of the other programs, Genesis, CSAP, tobacco, they're all continuing to do their great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Indira, I think I'll speak for the whole board and hopefully in just saying that we really appreciate how hard it is to make decisions and prioritize and have these tough conversations. So thanks for doing that. And thanks for the team, including Heather, for leading through that.
Heather led a lot of the visioning, and I'm just really grateful for Heather's leadership. So thank you. I appreciate the thank you. Yeah. I mean, these are not easy conversations, but we knew that we definitely had to figure out a way to stabilize that team and also to figure out how to get very strategic about what we need to focus on. And I will say that, it is a little bit of a worry with the budget reconciliation that's happening now, what's happening with Health and Human Services at the federal level, what's happening with SAMHSA. So in that substance use space, mental health spaces, we just don't know what that's going to look like. So we'll probably have a better picture in the next couple months, but we wanted to provide them with the opportunity to start planning so that we could then start applying for very targeted and specific grants that would help to launch that work and keep it going.
All right, so the second one, or the second division that really took a big reduction is CEDAM with the 29.9 reduction. It went from 2.6 million to a 2.3 million dollar budget. So it really reflects the end of COVID era funding. For example, harm reduction took a 40% reduction. Communicable disease actually increased, but that is because they absorb immunization program staff and from post-COVID, including employee health duties. And then in the emergency management, held flat, really working to make sure that we keep that program intact. So really returning back to pre-pandemic staffing, but with a tighter alignment to grant requirements and local needs. We continue to really observe or at least assess this program. Recently, we've had some reductions in some of their grants here in 2025. So we're making some adjustments, but we'll continue looking at any grants that they're out or that they have currently right now, making sure that we receive all the revenue. So another program that has endured a lot, and Stephanie has done a great job, working with their team to give us some great recommendations out of all the divisions, working through priority-based budgeting. I'd probably have to say CEDAM had the most. They're really willing to put everything out on the table and really try to move us forward within the scenarios that were provided to them. So just wanted to thank y'all. I mean, all of them have worked hard, but Stephanie really stepped it up at first and really worked with her team.
And I will just say that the restructuring of immunizations under communicable diseases was a prior organizational structure prior to COVID, if I'm remembering correctly, Indira. Yeah. So this is reverting to our
Pre-code.
to a structure that we used before. Yeah, Morgan might remember that we actually came to the Board of Health in January of 2020 or December of 2019 to start to reshape. And part of that was because harm reduction had become so big and immunizations was really kind of limited on their funding. And so we did a restructure right before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit, and there was no way that we could provide COVID shots with those two embedded together because the epi grew to 40, immunizations grew to 30. But as all that funding has disappeared, we are definitely going back to a structure that's going to help us meet all of our needs.
Excellent, sir. And finally, we have family health. So family health did an 18.5 cut, 3.8 million to a $3.3 million budget, reflecting just really the grant volatility. This program is heavily funded by grants. They do a great job collecting grants or actually going out for grants. So the nurse family partnership took a 7.5 reduction. It reduced the home visiting slots due to federal funding. And then WIC was a 0% change, protected as a federal mandate program. Children with special needs took a 3.8% change, trimming administrative overhead while preserving direct services. Uncertainty with division as they continue to work is just overall just heavily grants. So we'll continue monitoring. We work with Daphne. She does a lot of community engagement. She does a lot of relationship building with the grantors. So continue to monitor the budgets. One of the things that we've also have discussed in leadership is, as some of these grants sunset, the term positions also sunset. As I talked to you, Morgan, earlier, that will also adjust how our personnel and operations ratio is. So we'll continue monitoring these. We hope to keep.
I just want to point one thing out really quickly. That blackout does not mean that program's going away. It is being moved over to environmental health. And Mondo will talk more about that in a second.
Sorry, I'm
Referring back.
environmental health, right? Okay. Oh. And the last one is environmental health. I thought this
So
was.
this is family health. You've already done environmental
That's what I
health.
thought, right?
I was just mentioning
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
CHP.
You
Was absorbed in environmental.
I was like, what?
I just wanted
Okay.
to remind you.
All right. Okay, keep going. That's what I thought. I did talk about the fee base. Keep going. Okay, so go to the next one. Sorry if I'm boring you. So this is the timeline that we started in December, if you recall, when we first brought to y'all kind of the implementation of priority-based budgeting. We've been through most of the phases. So foundational phase, if you recall, is really just building overall the objective, the goal we were trying to do. And then we moved into developing some of the framework. We went to the phase or the framing phase, which took the majority of the time. And now we're in the implementation phase. So really phase one right now is we developed the scenarios, monitoring and rebasing the budget. So currently right now, today is we're actually recommending the 26 budget and hopefully I get your recommendation or your support to move forward. And then the next couple months, we're going to start looking at prioritizing process improvements and revenue generation opportunities. We're also reevaluating funding needs. So we'll continue looking at the needs in 2025. Lindy, to your point, I'll continue looking at 25 to see if I can preserve fund balance. Ultimately, that's the goal. That will really put us in a good position for 26, 27, and hopefully 28. And then ongoing monitoring and reporting, we'll continue providing that reporting to the board. But the other thing that we need to build in priority-based budgeting is the accountability side and the transparency side. And then building, hopefully a dashboard. We'll get with Kelly's team, some on KPIs to kind of demonstrate what we're doing. Did we do the right reductions? Are we providing the service levels that we promised or that we projected, because we don't know what next year it's going to look like. And then the next thing is reporting this out. I think it's important that we report out the changes and how it's affecting. I think as the board representing the agency out in the public, we want to make sure we give you those tools to be able to answer those questions, how it got affected. Last thing you want to do is get bombarded by surprise questions and not be able to answer. So I want to make sure we provide that as best as we can. Excellent. And so just a little bit more of the timeline. Important dates. We have to submit a budget at the end of the month, the 28th. of August to the commissioners or to the county. We're in the process of, if we get today's support, we'll be entering that on the 28th. We're also, like I said, provide kind of some of the same things in the last slide, but I want to talk about the IGA. We have a meeting coming up in September, it'd be meeting 2, as we continue drafting the IGA and getting some common ground with the county. We'll ultimately bring that back to this group for your review and support. But right now, what we're really doing is looking at anything that should be in the IGA and how it affects the IGA. We're looking at the financial side of the IGA and then ultimately bring that back. So more to come on that. We are continually working on that. I don't believe it'll happen for the 26 budget, but at least we'll have something in place, hopefully by the 27, 28. And then the next thing is August, we'll probably bring a budget amendment here in the next quarter. Depending, we're still evaluating our grants, if anything has been reduced or came in higher, but that's more to come on that. The other thing that we have coming up is obviously we'll have a budget book, but in December, we'd ultimately bring this back to the board for y'all to approve and then move us forward for January 1st. We're also working with the division team on any communication that we have in regards to staffing and transitions. So we're working on that and hopefully get that out to staff and communicate. And then ultimately continue this reevaluating. It's going to be a constant until we get to next year, and then reporting and take any questions from the board. If you have questions or concerns, please let me know. We're almost there. Okay. So our goal is to seek board approval for the proposed 2026 budget, enabling us to submit it to the county commissioners on schedule. This budget is a result of careful, data-driven planning and collaboration across all divisions. Through priority-based budgeting, we've targeted reduction strategically and protected essential services. That we've made investments in critical priorities such as health equity, emergency preparedness, and data modernization. Approving the budget allows us to move forward confidently, maintaining fiscal sustainability and ensure the agency remains resilient and agile in changing funding environments. And we welcome your questions or discuss about moving us forward for an approval.
Thanks, Armando. I'm going to jump in and, I think there's nothing in here in this presentation that's surprising me or I think the rest of the board, because there has been clear communication throughout this process. And I have said it before, I will say it again, thanks you for all of the work that all of the staff went into this process to identify where we can bring ourselves into greater sustainability. I also want to acknowledge this is a significant hit to our budget. And I know that it hurts the staff and it will most likely impact our services in the community. And I know there's a lot of work going in to minimize those impacts, but I think it's impossible to take a 20% hit without having some impacts. And certainly hearing about the workforce reduction really hurts, definitely, because we love our folks that work at BCPH. I do think, we are on the path of getting to a more sustainable budget, and that's really important. And we want to be prepared for the unknown, and we want to be able to respond for our communities with greater strength and stability. So again, I appreciate the work that's gone into it. And one question I have for all of the leadership is, how are you addressing the big culture changes that the org is facing through these significant budget impacts?
Sure. You want to start? Sure. Well, when we started the PBB, the division managers definitely identified that we were going to have to make some workforce alignment changes. And we recognized there was funding going away, and that obviously doesn't feel good. And so we did hold off as a leadership group on filling some vacancies. And we held off on those strategically so we could create opportunities for staff that would be impacted. Boulder County also has had a culture, the county itself has had a culture of being very, having all the jobs be open and competitive. And while that works when you have a robust economy with, decent funding, that works fine. But we recognize that we have a really, amazing group of staff that really should be able to be hired internally. So working with the Health Equity Committee, we drafted a internal hiring guidance document, and we ran it through HR to make sure that it matched all the HR processes. And so many of the vacancies that we have, we are starting to post internal just to BCPH staff. And so this allows for people to have a greater opportunity to move into another position. And that's huge because it helps us to meet our culture goals of trying to keep as many people as possible. We don't have to onboard new people. And it allows for opportunities within the agency, and people don't have to compete with other people from the outside. So that is one big culture shift that we've made. And I've seen a number of people, one thing that we ask people to do is to send an email out before the job even posts to say, hey, I'm hiring. And that Rachel has 2 positions she's going to be hiring. And so she recently sent out an email, and lots of people expressed interest. So that allows them to go and shadow them and to see what the job is like and ask those key questions before the job gets posted, when you as the hiring manager cannot have those conversations past that. So that's one big culture piece. The other piece is we have the employee assistance program at Boulder County also allows for you to have support through the EAP for your resume and preparing for jobs. And so that has helped. And then we've recently just added, Kelly and her team have added with Sean, we call it, is it Headshots by Sean? We're offering headshots because those are very expensive. So Sean is been doing headshots once a month so people can go and get their photos done. And we are recognizing that this is, these are challenging times economically, and we're trying to do our best in giving people enough ample time to be able to prepare and recognize that they might need to be looking for a job someplace else. And so that kind of, it hurts. It's very painful. I will say that it's been really hard, I think, on all the management because these are people that, we have very strong relationships with, and it's not about performance, right? It's just about the budget and what's happening with the budget and the fiscal challenges that we face. And I think that in some ways it makes it a little harder because we know that these are really talented people. So go ahead, Val. Add anything?
I just want to add a couple things.
Yeah.
No, but yours is, it's spot on. I think another thing we've done is we put up on the information center like a place where people can post public health or public health related jobs. So people can go on that. And I invite y'all on the board even to come on that. You find stuff, so you can add a job, and so the civ admin is doing that work with that and making sure stuff is posted and goes off and the jobs go off and things like that. And, we set up, one thing that's really hard, and I think that Amy was mentioning this on the first part, is that communication part, right? Because what people want to know a lot is, I'm going to have my job, right? And that's not a communications thing necessarily, right? So we set up a system where we're trying to communicate every 2 weeks, right? And it's kind of pulled off track because different places, different things happen and we get pulled off message. We have an anonymous question board where we post the question. We're going to be posting the questions as soon as we get them
And the answers?
Any answers into on the information pages where people can look at that, or how do we answer that and things like that. So I think these are your communication's a tricky one, right? Because we provide the best we can of what's the process look like, where are we at? And so, for example, last week we were talking about timelines. We're adding timelines to that communication in different things. So it's hard for that comms team too, because they're not in this space, right? So we have to be careful in how we get the right messaging out to people.
The only thing I would add is I'm looking more, I think it's resetting culture as new year comes, as new budget. I think that's going to be important. I've had discussions with Lexi is how do we reset culture. It's that organizational change, because this is a big change. It's not, there's different types of organizational change. This is your big change. So I think it's part of restarting culture and really going back to the drawing board and saying, what do we want to look like and what kind of culture do we want? Because it's different. Beginning January, this is going to be a different organization or agency. It's going to look different. It's have a different feel. And I think it's restarting that culture and hopefully starting a new culture, right? So I think that's what I think the next steps that I would recommend.
I'll mention a couple of additional things. One is really focusing in on workload management, and our staff has a tendency to want to do everything for everyone. And so one culture shift is really helping them to be okay with doing the required work and recognizing that not doing every single thing for everyone that you have ever possibly done that's not part of your expectation. That's hard for our staff to make that shift, but we continue to try to reinforce that expectation. That as our expectation is not that your workload increases with these changes, but that we're standing back in some other areas. A second one that I would mention is really kind of a big picture one, which is moving towards accountability and quantitative data. And those KPIs, and that we need to be able to see that, and we need to be able to communicate to the community what their investment is getting them from public health. And so this is not a space that our agency has been robust in previously. So we've really had to build the infrastructure for this, and along with building the infrastructure is also bringing this culture of transparency, data collection, and accountability, which has been a big lift. A third area that I'll mention is that we are trying to invest extra time and support as we move people as we do a lot of internal hiring, and we've done some pretty significant shifts lately to make sure that our new leadership in different areas is supported for that transition, because they have a lot of work that they're taking on. And then I would say, one of the last ones I want to mention is I think previously programs were largely responsible for kind of dictating their own budgets based on their revenues. And we really have a shift happening here, which is it's a more centralized approach to budget and finance. We recognize that it may feel like programs don't have quite as much autonomy. But what it does is it allows us to actually have one large agency vision of what we're trying to accomplish together, that drives the whole agency forward. And it allows us to avoid the kind of situation that we got into with the incremental budgeting. So that is a huge difference, because I think for a lot of teams, it feels like they're being disempowered, and we don't want to, that's not the goal. And so we're trying really hard to be as transparent as we can in this process, to be as participatory as we can. That was part of, the division managers came up with the recommendations, working with their teams, and recognizing that, hopefully this is not this kind of massive change, and priority-based budgeting is not something that we would do very often. Because I think that some of the issues around confidentiality and transparency when you're making significant personnel decisions also feels to the staff like it's not being transparent. And the reality is there are a lot of things that we can't legally share during this process. And I'm sure that that's frustrating for them.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple things. Lexi sparked my brain. The workload conversation is a very important conversation, and we have a workload plan, and we've been rolling out across the agency for employees, all staff. And then we also have had a series of conversations about workload with the supervisors. So the first one was really kind of going through all the best practices around workload, which it was really important because we are going to have to probably go back, particularly in some divisions that have been restructured a lot, and really define roles and responsibilities and redefine
roles and responsibilities, because as they lose capacity in certain areas, they're not going to be able to pick that up anymore. And there's no expectation that they should. So I do see that as part of the future conversations around roles and responsibilities, making sure it's very clear what everyone is working on, how much they're going to do, and then making sure that we're evaluating our success along the way, to Lexi's point about the metrics. And then I also think that, it is my belief that Armando, and I'm really grateful for Armando, Desiree, and Sarah and their leadership in getting us to a more sustainable future, because I really think that if we can weather the next few years, we won't have to go through this again. Now, that all depends on what the big, beautiful budget reconciliation looks like. But I think we'll be able to weather the storms over the next few years much better by doing this now. And it's my hope that we can create that sustainable future so we don't have to go through this again. But it is painful. I just want to recognize it's very painful. It's painful for everyone. And it's unfortunate that we have to go through it, but I really appreciate all the leadership that is moving in this direction from everyone.
Yeah, I just want to add something that is just a recognition that with the federal cuts and things, the job market's really difficult and people know that. And so to rehire a population LDEP, we had over 250 applications to that. And a lot of those people were fed and things. So there's lots of other stressors that contribute to this space as well, obviously.
Any other
Questions?
Well, before we conclude, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank everyone who made this proposed 26 budget possible. Thank you to the finance team, division managers, O&F staff, our director team, Lexi, Dura, myself, Kelly, Desiree, who collaborated and worked hard and worked through the priority-based budgeting process. And a special thanks to the Board of Health for their guidance, support, and engagement as we work to align resources with community priorities and build a more sustainable future for Boulder Public Health. Your partnership is critical in ensuring that we deliver essential services while positioning the agency for long-term success. Thank you.
So I think we just need a vote.
Are you teeing that up?
I can move to recommend the budget as outlined in the study session today. Do you need anything more official than that, Armando and Lexi?
Nope, that's it.
I will second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This concludes it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everyone. I'm coming that way physically, so I will see you all and give me 10 minutes to get there.